Not through the mouse hole this time, he told himself. I'm sick of the giant. It's a dumb game and I can't ever win. Whatever I choose, it's wrong. But he went through the mouse hole anyway, and over the small bridge in the garden. He avoided the ducks and the dive-bombing mosquitoes. He had tried playing with them, but they were too easy. And even if he played with the ducks too long, he turned into a fish, which he didn't like. Being a fish reminded him too much of being frozen in the battle room. His whole body rigid, waiting for practice to end so Dap would thaw him. So as usual, he found himself going up the rolling hills. The landslides began. At first, he had got caught again and again, crushed in an exaggerated blot of gore oozing from under a rock pile. Now, though, he had mastered the skill of running up the slopes at an angle to avoid the crush, always seeking higher ground. And as always, the rock slides finally stopped being jumbles of rock. The face of the hill broke open, and instead of shale, it was white bread, puffy, rising like dough, as the crust broke away and fell. It was soft and spongy. His figure moved more slowly. And when he jumped down off the bread, he was standing on a table. Giant loaf of bread behind him, giant stick of butter beside him, and the giant himself leaning his chin in both his hands, looking at him. Ender's figure was about as tall as the giant's head from chin to brow. I think I'll bite your head off, said the giant, as he always did. At this time, instead of running away or standing there, Ender walked his figure up to the giant's face and kicked him in the chin. The giant stuck out his tongue, and Ender fell to the ground. How about a guessing game? Asked the giant. So it didn't make any difference. The giant only played the guessing game. Stupid computer. Millions of possible scenarios in its memory, and the giant could only play one stupid game. The giant, as always, set two huge shot glasses, as tall as Ender's knees, on the table in front of him. As always, the two were filled with different liquids. The computer was good enough, the liquids were never repeated. Not that he could remember. This one had a thick, creamy-looking liquid. The other hissed and foamed. One is poison, one is not, said the giant. Guess right, and I'll take you to fairyland. Guessing, then sticking his head into one of the glasses to drink, which he never guessed right. Sometimes his head was dissolved. Sometimes he caught on fire. Sometimes he fell in and drowned. Sometimes he fell out, turned green, and rotted away. It was always ghastly, and the giant always laughed. Ender knew that whatever he chose, he would die. The game was rigged. On the first death, his figure would reappear on the giant's table to play again. On the second death, he'd come back to the landslides, then to the bridge, then to the mouse hole, and then, if he still went back to the giant, played again, and died again, his desk would go dark. Free play over would march around the desk, and Ender would lie back on his head and tremble until he could finally go back to sleep. The game was rigged, but still, the giant talked about fairyland, some stupid, childish 3-year-old's fairyland that probably had some stupid Mother Goose or Pac-Man or Peter Pan. It wasn't even worth getting into, but he had to find some way of beating the giant to get there. He drank the creamy liquid. Immediately, he began to inflate and rise like a balloon. The giant laughed. He was dead again. He played again, and this time, the liquid set like concrete and held his head down while the giant cut him open along the spine, deboned him like a fish, and began to eat it while his arms and legs quivered. He reappeared at the landslides, and decided not to go on, even if he let the landslides cover him once. Even though he was sweating and he felt cold. But in his next life, he went back up the hill until they turned into bread, and stood on the giant's table as the shot glasses were set before him. He stared at the two liquids, the one foaming, the other with waves in the air like a sea. He tried to guess what kind of death each one held. Probably a fish will come out of the ocean one and eat me. The foaming one will probably asphyxiate me. I hate this game. It isn't fair. It's stupid. It's rotten. And instead of pushing his face into one of the liquids, he kicked one over, then the other, then dodged the giant's huge hands as the giant shouted, "Cheetah! Cheetah!" He jumped at the giant's face, clambered up his lip and nose, and began to dig into the giant's eye. The stuff came away like cottage cheese, and the giant screamed. Ender's figure burrowed into the eye, climbed right in, burrowed in and in. The giant fell over backward. The view shifted as he fell, and when the giant came to rest on the ground, there were intricate, lacy trees all around. A bat flew up and landed on the giant's dead nose. Ender brought his figure up out of the giant's eye. "How did you get here?" the bat asked. "Nobody ever comes here." Ender could not answer, of course, so he reached down, took a handful of the giant's eye stuff, and offered it to the bat. The bat took it and flew off, shouting as it went, "Welcome to Fairyland!" He had made it. He ought to explore, ought to climb down the giant's face and see what finally he had achieved. Instead, he signed off, put his desk in the locker, stripped off his clothes, and pulled a blanket over him. He hadn't meant to kill the giant. This was supposed to be a game. Not a choice whether his own grisly death and an even worse murder. I'm a murderer, even when I play. Peter would be proud of me. Once again, I am getting a very high dose of 70s vibes between the way the technology works and this strange sort of acidy little trip. He turns into fishes to avoid the ducks, and the bread, the landslide becomes I think that technology was just so limited when this book was written that the author was trying to be very abstract. But I do really enjoy the part where Pac-Man gets loped in with Little Bo Peep and Mother Goose. So Pac-Man now and that in the future is like a nursery rhyme or something like that. That's great. That's fantastic. That's some world building that I'm really here for. And so sometimes it's hard, I think, to get those little details when I'm just powering through. So that's the really big takeaway when you end up reading the book, because you'll end up being able to focus on things that I didn't focus on. It's nice to know what Ender can do when offered with the impossible. The players' deaths have always been sickening. I've always thought that the giant's drink was the most perverted part of the whole mind game. But going for the eye like that, this is the one we want to put in command of our fleet. What matters is that he won the game. That couldn't be won. I suppose you'll move him on now? We were waiting to see how he handled the thing with Bernard. He handled it perfectly. So, as soon as he can cope with a situation, you move him to a next one he can't cope with? Doesn't he get any rest? He'll have a month or two, maybe 3, with his launch group. It's really quite a long time in a child's life. Does it ever seem to you that these boys aren't children? I look at what they do, the way they talk. They don't seem like little kids. They're the most brilliant children in the world, each in his own way. But shouldn't they still act like children? They aren't normal. They act like history. Napoleon and Wellington, Caesar and Brutus. We're going to save the world, not heal the wounded heart. You are too compassionate. General Levy has no pity for anyone. All the videos say so. But don't hurt the boy. Are you joking? I mean, don't hurt him more than you have to. Elias sat across from Ender at dinner. I finally figured out how you sent that message using Bernard's name. Me? Asked Ender. Come on, who else? It sure wasn't Bernard. And Shin isn't too hot on the computer. And I know it wasn't me. Who else? Doesn't matter. I figured out how to fake new student entries. You just created a new student named Bernard. So the computer didn't kick you out as a repeat of another student. Sounds like that might work, said Ender. Okay. It does work. But you do that practically on the first day. Or somebody. Maybe Dap did it to keep Bernard from getting too much control. I found something else. I can't do it with your name. Oh? Anything with Ender gets kicked out. I can't get inside your files at all either. You made your own security system. Maybe. Elia grinned. I just got in and thrashed somebody's files. He's right behind me on the cracking system. I need the protection, Ender. I need your system. If I give you my system, you'll know how I do it, and you'll get in and thrash me. You say me? Eli asked. I'm the sweetest friend you've got. Ender laughed. I'll set up a system for you. Now? Can I finish eating? You never finish eating. It was true. Ender's tray always had food on it after a meal. Ender looked at the plate and decided he was through. Let's go then. When they got to the barracks, Ender squatted down by his bed and sat. Get your desk and bring it over here. I'll show you. And when Eli brought his desk to Ender's bed, Ender was just sitting there, his locker still closed. What's up? Asked Eli. In answer, Ender palmed his locker. Unauthorized access attempt, it said. Wouldn't open. Somebody done a dance in your head, mama, Eli said. Somebody eated your face. You sure you want my security system now? Ender said as he got up and walked from his bed. Ender, Eli said, and Ender turned around. Eli was holding a little piece of paper. What is it? Eli looked up at him. Don't you know? This was on your bed. You must have sat on it. Ender took it from him. Ender Wigan. Assigned Salamander Army. Commander Bonzo Madrid. Effective immediately. Code green, green, brown. No possessions transferred. You're smart, Ender. But you don't do the battle room any better than me. Ender shook his head. It was the stupidest thing he could think of. To promote him now? Nobody got promoted before they were 8 years old. Ender wasn't even 7 yet. And the launchies usually moved into the armies together, with most armies getting a new kid at the same time. There were no transfer slips on any of the other beds. Just when things were finally coming together, just when Bernard was getting along with everybody, even Ender, just when Ender was beginning to make a real friend out of a lie, just when his life was finally getting livable. Ender reached down to pull Eli up from his bed. Salamander Army's in contention anyway, Eli said. Ender was so angry at the unfairness of the transfer that tears were coming from his eyes. Mustn't cry, he told himself. Eli saw the tears, but he had the grace not to say so. They're fart heads, Ender. They won't even let you take anything of your own. Ender grinned and didn't cry after all. Think I should just go naked? Eli laughed. On impulse, Ender hugged him, tight, almost as if he were Valentine. He even thought of Valentine then and wanted to go home. I don't want to go, he said. Eli hugged him back. I understand then, Ender. You are the best of us. Maybe they're in a hurry to teach you everything. I found a typo. I found a typo. I found a typo. They don't teach you. They don't want to teach me everything, Ender said. I want to learn what it was like to have a friend. Eli nodded soberly. Always my friend. Always the best of friends, he said. He grinned. Go slice up the buggers. Yeah. Ender smiled back. Eli suddenly kissed Ender on the cheek and whispered in his ear, Salam. Then, red-faced, he turned away and walked to his own bed at the end of the barracks. Ender guessed that the kiss was the word were somehow forbidden. A suppressed religion, perhaps. Or maybe the word had some powerful and private meaning for Eli alone. Whatever it meant to Eli, Ender knew it was sacred. that he had uncovered himself for Ender, as once Ender's mother had done when he was young, before they put the monitor to his neck, and she put her hands on his head when she thought he was asleep and prayed over him. Ender had never spoken of that to anyone, not even to mother, but had kept it as a memory of holiness, of how his mother loved him, and how she thought that no one, not even he, could see or hear her. That was what Eli had given him, a gift so sacred that even Ender could not be allowed to understand what it meant. After such a thing, nothing could be said. Eli reached to his bed and turned around to see Ender. Their eyes held for only a moment, locked in understanding. Then Ender left. There would be no green-brown in this part of the school. He would have to pick up the colors of one of the public areas. The others would be finished with the dinner very soon. He didn't want to go near the mess hall. The game room would be nearly empty. None of the games appealed to him the way he felt now. So he went back to the bank of public desks at the back of the moon and signed in his own private game. He went quickly to Fairyland. The giant was dead, and when he arrived now, he began to climb carefully down the table, jump to the leg of the giant's overturned chair, and then make the drop to the ground. For a while, there had been rats gnawing at the giant's body, but Ender had killed one with a pin from the giant's ragged shirt, and they had left him alone after that. The giant's corpse had essentially finished its decay. What could be torn down by the small scavengers was torn. The maggots had done their work, and the organs. Now it was a desiccated mummy, hollowed out, teeth and rigid grin, eyes empty, fingers curled. Ender remembered burrowing through the eye when it had been alive, and malicious and intelligent. Angry and frustrated as he was, Ender wished never to do such violence again. Ender wished to do such violence again, but the giant had become part of the landscape now, and so there could be no rage against him. Ender had always gone over the bridge to the castle of the Queen of Hearts, where there were games enough for him, but none of those appealed to him now. He went around the giant's corpse and followed the brook upstream to where it emerged from the forest. There was a playground there, slides and monkey bars, teeter-totters and merry-go-rounds, with a dozen children laughing as they played. Ender came and found that in the game he had become a child, though usually his figure in the games was an adult. In fact, he was smaller than the other children. He got in line for the slide. The other children ignored him. He climbed up to the top, watching the boy before him whirl down the long spiral to the ground. Then he sat and began to slide. He had not slid for a moment when he fell right through the slide and landed on the ground under the ladder. The slide would not hold him. Neither would the monkey bars. He could climb anyways. But then at random a bar seemed to be unstable and he fell. He could sit on the seesaw until it rose to his apex. Then he fell. When the merry-go-round went fast, he could not hold onto any of the bars, and centrifugal force hurled him off. And the other children, their laughter was raucous, offensive. They circled around him and pointed and laughed for many seconds before they went back to their play. Ender wanted to hit them, to throw them in the brook. Instead, he walked into the forest. He found a path, which soon became an ancient brick road, much overgrown with weeds, but unusable. There were hints of possible games off to either side, but Ender followed none of them. He wanted to see where the path led. It led to a clearing, with a well in the middle, and a sign that said, "Drink, traveler." Ender went forward and looked at the well. Almost at once, he heard a snarl. Out of the woods emerged a dozen slavering wolves with human faces. Ender recognized they were the children from the playground. Only now their teeth could tear. Ender, weaponless, was quickly devoured. His next figure appeared, as usual, in the same spot and was eaten again, though Ender tried to climb down into the well. The next appearance, though, was at the playground. Again, the children laughed at him. Laugh all you like, Ender thought. I know what you are. He pushed one of them aside. She followed him, hungry. Ender led her up the slide. Of course, he fell through, but this time, following so closely behind him, she also fell through. When she hit the ground, she turned to a wolf and lay there, dead or stunned. One by one, Ender led each of the others down into a trap. But before he finished off the last of them, the wolves began reviving, and they were no longer children. Ender was torn apart again. This time, shaking and sweating, Ender found his figure revived on the giant's table. I should quit, he told himself. I should go to my new army. But instead, he made his figure drop down from the table and walk around the giant's body to the playground. This time, as soon as the child hit the ground and turned into a wolf, Ender dragged the body to the brook and pulled it in. Each time, the body sizzled as though the water were acid. The wolf was consumed, and a dark cloud of smoke arose and drifted away. The children were easily dispatched, though they began following him in twos and threes at the end. Ender found no wolves awaiting for him in the clearing, and he lowered himself into the well on the bucket rope. The light in the cavern was dim, but he could see piles of jewels. He passed them by, noticing that behind him, eyes glinted among the gleams. A table covered with food did not interest him. He passed through a group of cages hanging from the ceiling of the cave, each containing some exotic, friendly-looking creature. I'll play with you later, Ender thought. At last he came to the door with the words in glowing emeralds. The end of the world. He did not hesitate. He opened the door and stepped through. He stood on a small ledge, high on a cliff overlooking terrain of bright and deep green forests, with dashes of autumn color, and patches here and there of cleared land, with ox-drawn plows and small villages, a castle on the rise in the distance, and clouds riding the currents of the air below him. Above him, the sky was the ceiling of a vast cavern with crystals dangling in bright stalactites. The door closed behind him. Ender studied the scene intently. With the beauty of it, he cared less for survival than usual. He cared little at the moment what the game of this place might be. He found it, and seeing it was its own reward. And so, with no thought of consequences, he jumped off the bridge. Now he plummeted downward towards a roiling river and savage rocks. But a cloud came between him and the ground as he fell, and caught him and carried him away. It took him to the tower of the castle, and through the open window, it bore him in. There it left him in a room with no apparent door and floor or ceiling, and windows looking over a certainly fatal fall. A moment ago, he had thrown himself from a ledge carelessly. This time he hesitated. The small rug before the fire unraveled into a long, slender serpent with wicked teeth. I am your only escape, it said. Death is your only escape. Ender looked around the room for a weapon. But suddenly the screen went dark. Words flashed around the rim of the desk. Report to command immediately. You are late. Green, green, brown. Furious, Ender snapped off the desk and went to the color wall, where he found the ribbon of green, green, brown, touched it, and followed it as it lit up before him. The dark green lit green and brown of the ribbon. The dark green, light green, and brown of the ribbon reminded him of the early autumn kingdom he had found in the game. I must go back there, he told himself. The serpent is a long thread. I can let myself down from the tower and find my way through the place. Perhaps it's called the end of the world because it's the end of the games, because I can go to one of the village and become one of the little boys working and playing there, with nothing to kill and nothing to kill me, just living there. As he thought of it, though, he could not imagine what just living might actually be. He had never done it in his life, but he wanted to do it anyway. In the movie, there is no giant. There's no like magic video game thing, and I understand why. I mean, first of all, I like the magic video game place because it's so much better than Ender's Home and Ender's School and Ender's Crummy Family. I like it. It just totally changes the pace of the book, and it makes it more. Oh, tell me what has happened up at this point. Yeah, I can. I can tell you. Um. Oh, I guess that's what I was getting to. Basically, Ender is like he's been monitored his entire life by like a monitoring device that was implanted in the back of his neck. It's absolutely a dystopian sci-fi future, but instead of it being a like fascist sort of thing, it's an internationalist. The commies won, but ultimately they kind of made like kind of a Star Trek kind of setup, so it's not that bad. It's not that bad. The only like really kind of like okay, not really bad thing, but the only different things is there's like a 2-child policy where you can only have 2 children. So Ender is the third of only 2 children that were allowed. And the first 2 were candidates for a program, but they both washed out. So that's why they allowed Ender to be born. So basically, Ender doesn't really fit into the world at all. He left behind his sister, Valentine, who he loves more than anyone else. I guess the only reason Valentine is good is because his brother Peter is bad. Peter really thought that he was going to get to graduate in the program, but that was not so. And so he holds that against Ender. So he's basically a mix between his sister and his brother. He's ruthless and terrifying, but he's also tries the whole book really is him trying not to kill people. That Ender's greatest struggle is trying not to kill people. It says that he's like 6 or 7 or 8 right now, but he is not a 6 or a 7 or an 8-year-old. He doesn't behave or look or act like one, and that's part of it too. Is they did something to or some I don't know. Okay, but before I get too much into it, because the dystopian part of it is really cool. The reason why Ender is the way he is, it's not so much that he's special. It's that the selection process is so like intense and it works so well that it could actually find him. The real horror of this book is that if mankind were to die, it would just be because Ender just went along with a normal life, that he just went to go live a normal, boring life and then died normally and boringly like everyone else. But he has all this potential, and it would have just been like squandered. The entire potential of the human race would have been squandered if Ender didn't get his day. No problem. Armies were larger than launch groups, and the army barracks room was larger too. It was long and narrow, with bunks on both sides, so long, in fact, that you could see the curvature of the floor as the far end bent upward, part of the wheel of the battle school. Ender stood by the door. A few boys near the door glanced at him, but they were older, and it seemed as though they hadn't even seen him yet. They were on with their conversations, lying and leaning on bunks. They were discussing battles, of course. The older boys always did. They were all much larger than Ender. The 10 and 11-year-olds towered over him. Even the youngest were 8, and Ender was not large for his age. He tried to see which of the boys was the commander, but most were somewhere between battle dress and what soldiers always carried, and what soldiers always called their sleep uniform, skin from head to toe. Many of them had desks out, but a few were studying. Ender stepped into the room. The moment he did, he was noticed. What do you want? Demanded the boy who had the upper bunk by the door. He was the largest of them. Ender had noticed him before. A young giant who had whiskers growing raggedly on his chin. You're not a salamander. I'm supposed to be, I think, Ender said. Green, green, brown, right? I was transferred. He showed the boy, obliviously, the door guard, his paper. The door guard reached for it. Ender withdrew it, just out of reach. I'm supposed to give it to Bonzo Madrid. Now another boy joined in on the conversation, a smaller boy, but still larger than Ender. Not Bonzo, pisshead. Bonso. The name's Spanish. Oh. Spanish accent. Spanish accent. Not Bonzo. No, that's French. Fuck. Not Bonzo, pisshead. Bonso. Not Bonso, pisshead. Bonso. The name's Spanish. Bonso, Madrid. Aquí nosotros hablamos español. Señor Gran Fedor. You must be Bonzo then, Ender said, pronouncing the... Oh, you must be Bonzo then, Ender said, promoting the name correctly. No, just a brilliant and talented polyglot. Petra Arcanian, the only girl in the Salamander army, with more balls than anybody in the room. Mother Petra, she talkin', said one of the boys. She talkin'. Another chimed in. Shit talking. Quite a few laughed. Just between you and me, Petra said. If they gave the battle school in Enema, they'd stick it in at green, brown. Ender despaired. He already had nothing going for him. Grossly undertrained, small, inexperienced, doomed to be resented for early advancement. And now, by chance, he had made exactly the wrong friend, an outcast in the Salamander army. And she had just linked him with her in the minds of the rest of the army. A good day's work. For a moment, as Ender looked around at the laughing, jeering faces, imagine their bodies covered with hair, their teeth for tearing. Am I the only human being in this place? Are all the others animals waiting only to devour? Then he remembered a lie. In every army, surely, there was at least one worth knowing. Suddenly, though no one said to be quiet, the laughter stopped, and the group fell silent. Ender turned to the door. A boy stood there, tall and slender, with beautiful black eyes and slender lips, and hinted at refinement. I would follow such beauty, said something inside Ender. I would see as those I see. Who are you? Asked the boy quietly. Ender Wiggins, sir, Ender said. Reassigned from launch to the Salamander Army. He held out his papers. The boy took the orders in a swift, sure movement, without touching Ender's hand. How old are you, Wiggin? He asked. Almost 7? Still quietly, he said, I asked how old you are, not how old you almost are. I am 6 years, 9 months, and 12 days old. Have you been working in the battle room? A few months now. My aim is better. Any training in battle maneuvers? Have you ever been part of a tune? Have you ever carried out a joint exercise? Ender had never heard of such things. He shook his head. Madrid looked at him steadily. I see. As you will quickly learn, the officers in command of this school, most notably Major Anderson, who runs the game, are fond of playing tricks. Salamander Army is just beginning to emerge from a decent obscurity. We have won 12 of our last 20 games. We have surprised Rat and Scorpion and Hound. And we are all ready to play for the leadership. So of course, I am given such a useless, untrained, hopeless specimen of an underdeveloped stature as yourself, Petra said quietly. He isn't glad to meet you. Shut up, Ukrainian, Madrid said. To one trial, we now add another. But whatever obstacles our officers choose to fling in our path, we are still. Salamander! Cried the soldiers in one voice. Instinctively, Ender's perception of the events changed. It was a pattern, a ritual. Madrid was not trying to hurt him, merely taking control of a surprising event and using it to strengthen his control of his army. We are the fire that will consume them, belly and bowel, head and heart. Many flames of us, but one fire. Salamander, they cried again. Even this one will not weaken us. For a moment, Ender allowed himself to hope. I'll work hard and I'll learn quickly, he said. I didn't give you permission to speak, Madrid answered. I intend to trade you away as quickly as I can. I'll probably have to give up someone valuable along with you, as small as you are and worse and useless. One more frozen, inevitably, in every battle. That's all you are. And we're now at the point where every frozen soldier makes a difference in the standings. Nothing personal, Wigan, but I'm sure you can get your training at someone else's expense. He's all heart, Petra said. Madrid stepped closer to the girl and slapped her across the face with the back of his hand. It made a little sound, for only his fingernails had hit her. But there were bright red marks, 4 of them, on her cheek, and little pricks of blood marked where the tips of fingernails had struck. Here are your instructions, Wigan. I expect it is the last time I'll need to speak to you. You will stay out of the way when we're training in the battle room. You have to be there, of course, but you will not belong to any tune, and you will not take part in any maneuvers. When we've called the battle, you will dress quickly and present yourself at the gate with everyone else, but you will not pass through the gate until 4 full minutes after the beginning of the game. And then you will remain at the gate with your weapons undrawn and unfired until such a time as the game ends. Ender nodded. So he was to be a nothing. He hoped the trade happened soon. He also noticed that Petra did not so much as cry out loud in pain, though one spot of blood had beaded and ran, making a streak down to her jaw. Outcast she may be, but since Bonzo Madrid was not going to be Ender's friend, no matter what, he might as well make friends with Petra. He was assigned a bunk at the far end of the room, the upper bunk, so that when he lay on his bed, he couldn't even see the door. The curve of the ceiling blocked it. There were other boys near him, tired-looking boys, sullen, the ones least valued. They had noticed nothing welcome. They had nothing of welcome to say to Ender. He tried to palm his locker open, but nothing happened. He realized the lockers were not secured. All 4 of them had rings on them to pull them open. Nothing would be private then, now that he was in the army. There was a uniform in the locker, not the pale green of the Launchies, but the orange-trimmed dark green of the Salamander army. It did not fit well, but then they had probably never had to provide such a uniform for a boy so young. He was starting to take it off when he noticed Petra walking down the aisle toward him. He slid off the bunk and stood next to her to greet her. Relax, she said. I'm not an officer. You're a tune leader, aren't you? Someone nearby snickered. What gave you that idea, Wigan? You have the first bunk in the front. I bunk in the front because I'm the best sharpshooter in the Salamander army, and because Bonzo is afraid I'll start a revolution if the tune leaders don't keep an eye on me. As if I could start anything with boys like these, she indicated the sullen-faced boys in the nearby bunks. What was she trying to do? Make it worse than it already was? Everybody... Oh, cool. Wow. Something about the giant game that I really want. I feel like most armies anywhere in the world, you could basically you could fix most of the problems by saying one of two things. Either A, think for yourself, or B, don't think for yourself. And I think that's what the giant game is for, is getting them to think, like getting Ender to think for himself. But yeah, I know why the giant game wasn't in the movie. It would just be so hard to like I'm not even reading it. I'm not exactly sure like what Ender sees or does, because when he's like in the game or whatever, he's just holding a tablet. It's just a tablet, but it's just so vivid, and his actions are so. I think maybe really the best analog to future technology and future gaming that they could think of in the 70s was acid, and I think that's why it is just an acid trip. Yay! You're either back or you're baked or both. That's cool. He noticed Petra walking down the aisle toward his bed. He slid off the bunk and stood on the floor to greet her. Relax, she said. I'm not an officer. You're a toon leader, aren't you? Somebody nearby snickered. What gave you that idea, Wiggin? You have the bunk in the front. I bunk in the front because I'm the best sharpshooter in the Salamander army. And because Bonzo is afraid I'll start a revolution if the toon leaders don't keep an eye on me. As if I could start anything with boys like these, she indicated the sullen-faced boys in the nearby bunks. Whatever she was trying to do, maybe she was trying to make it worse than it already was. Everybody's better than I am, Ender said, trying to disassociate himself from her contempt for these boys who would. Oh my gosh. Trying to disassociate himself from her contempt for these boys who would, after all, be his near bunkmates. Man, whoa, that's a doozy. I've been thinking a lot about my disdain for exposition, and I believe that Orson Scott Card, I believe that he understands my disdain for exposition, because although the beginning part was boring, it read so quickly. It read. I mean, I'm not going to say like Dr. Seuss, because that it's actually hard to read Dr. Seuss for me. But it was just like there wasn't really a lot of heavy themes. The sentences were all framed very like straightforward. Um, when it comes to like the Magic video game land, it's like even more straightforward than it was at the beginning. That's why I enjoyed reading it so much, because like I didn't have a slip for like 8 pages. That was great. It was like being a record player. Um, but now that we're getting past the exposition, we're further than we're 80 pages into a 330 page book. Now the themes are starting to really settle in, and it's more than just foreshadowing. It's actually fomenting. And so for me, the reader, I've got to get my pacing right, because I like keeping that constant pace. But Mr. Scott Card is changing gears all the time. I'm a girl, she said, and you're a pissant of 6 years old. We have so much in common. Why don't we be friends? I won't do your desk work for you, he said. In a moment, she realized it was a joke. Ha, she said. It's all so military when you're in the game. School for us isn't like it is for the launchies. History and strategy and tactics and buggers and math and stars. Things you'll need as a pilot or a commander. You'll see. So you're my friend. Do I get a prize? Ender asked. He was imitating her swaggering sway of speaking, as if she cared about nothing. Bonzo isn't going to let you practice. He's going to make you take your desk to the battle room and study. He's right in a way. He don't want a totally untrained little kid to screw up his precise maneuvers. She lapsed into Guerrilla, the lanky talk, and imitated the Pigden English of uneducated people. Bonzo, he precise. He's so careful. He piss on a plate, and he'd never splash. Pigden found its way into here. Amazing. Ender grinned. Okay, so yeah, I guess these characters do seem to have perceived races or like traits, and it's just as easy as reading their name and making a quick leap. I guess. Yeah. Okay, I'll start. The battle room is open all the time if you want. I'll take you there in the off hours and show you some of the things I know. I'm not a great soldier, but I'm pretty good. And I sure know more than you do. If you want, Ender said, starting tomorrow morning after breakfast. What if somebody's using the room? We always went right after breakfast in my launch. No problem. There are 9 battle rooms. I've never heard of any other rooms. They all have the same entrance. The whole center of the battle school, the hub of the wheel, is battle rooms. They don't rotate with the rest of the station. That's how they do the null. Oh, the no gravity. It just holds still, no spin, no down. But they can set it up so that any one of the battle rooms at the entrance corridor we can use. Once you're inside, they move it along and another battle room's in position. Oh, like I said, right after breakfast. Right, Ender said. She started to walk away. Petra, he said. She turned back. Thanks. She said nothing, just turned around again and walked down the aisle. Ender climbed back to his bunk and finished taking off his uniform. He lay on the bed, doodling with his new desk, trying to decide if they had done anything to his access code. Sure enough, they had wiped out his security system. He couldn't own anything here, not even his desk. The lights dimmed a little, getting toward bedtime. Ender didn't know which bathroom to use. Go left out of the door, said the boy next to his bunk. We share it with Rat, Condor, and Squirrel. Ender thanked him and started to walk past. Hey, said the boy, you can't go out like that. Uniform at all times out of the room. Even to the toilet? Especially. And you're forbidden to speak to anyone from the other armies. At meals or at the toilet. You can get away with it sometimes in the game room. And of course, whenever a teacher tells you to. But if Bonjo catches you, you dead. You hear that? Thanks. And, Bonzo get mad if you skin by Petra. She was naked when I came in, wasn't she? She'd do what she like, but you'd keep her clothes on, Bonzo's orders. That was stupid. Petra still looked like a boy. It was a stupid rule. It set her apart, made her different. Split the army. Stupid, stupid. But how did Bonzo get to be a commander? If he didn't know better than that. Alai would be a better commander than Bonzo. He knew how to bring a group together. I know how to bring a group together too, thought Ender. Maybe I'll be commander someday. In the battle room, he was washing his hands when somebody spoke to him. Hey, they put the babies in salamander uniforms now. Ender didn't answer. He just dried off his hands. Hey, look! Salamander's getting babies now! Look at this! He could walk between my legs without even touching my balls. Because you got none, Dink, that's why, somebody answered. As Ender left the room, he heard somebody else say, It's Wiggin, you know, the smart-ass Launchy from the game room. He walked down the corridor, smiling. He might be short, but they knew his name. From the game room, of course, so it meant nothing. But they'd see. He'd be a good soldier, too. They'd all know his name soon enough. Not in the salamander armor, maybe, but soon enough. Something that I really caution anybody against doing, if you are a male, is reading females' voice, like female characters in a strange, like, I don't know, whatever your interpretation of what a female voice is, because we can't do it. But just pretending to be a female, it is not genuine. It is just creepy, and it basically shows the world what you think of women, and that like even like and it doesn't even matter what your opinion on them is. It just shows that it's such a like a one-dimensional there's no depth to it. It's simply just like a funny voice. It's fucking Mad Max going on. So I mean, really, just give all your try to give your characters a tone. I think that's really the best you can do. I mean, if it's an old hag or something, I think that's acceptable, just because they don't have that softness in their voice. But when it comes to reading any character, try to focus more on a tone than actually like changing your voice to meet theirs, because I mean, unless you're a ventriloquist, it comes off as strange at best. But the other thing is also like genuine, okay? Because people know when you're full of it. People absolutely know when you're full of it. It's the hardest thing in the world to try to seem genuine when you're not. You can seem emotionally unavailable, and that's the closest. If you can't seem genuine and you want to seem genuine, you can seem emotionally unavailable, and that's the closest thing to it. But even that really isn't going to do what actual genuineness can do. And I guess that's really why I'm emphasizing this so much. Is it's free. It's completely free to do, and it works. Like, well, when it works, it works. I'm not going to say it works every time, because if it worked every time, I don't know, something. It is so difficult for me to read nowadays. It is difficult for me to read nowadays. I'll say that. Unless I'm reading aloud. Just like lounging back and reading is so difficult because you have to be so relaxed to do it. So relaxed to do it. Petra was waiting in the corridor that led to the battle room. Wait a minute, she said to Ender. Rabbit Army just went in, and it takes a few minutes to change to the next battle room. Ender sat down beside her. There's more to the battle rooms than just switching from one to the next, he said. For instance, why is there gravity in the corridor outside the room just before we go in? Petra closed her eyes. And if the battle rooms are really free-floating, what happens when one is connected? Why doesn't it start to move with the rotation of the rest of the school? Ender nodded. These are mysteries, Petra said in a deep whisper. Do not pry into them. Terrible things happened to the last soldier who tried. He was discovered hanging These these are mysteries, Petra said in a deep whisper. Do not pry into them. Terrible things happened to the last soldier who tried. He was discovered hanging by his feet from the ceiling of the battle room, with his head stuffed in the toilet. Of course she was joking, but the message was clear. So I'm not the first person to ask the question? You remember this, little boy. When she said little boy, it sounded friendly, not contemptuous. They never tell you any more truth than they have to. But any kid with brains knows they've been there that they've been some changes in science. She speaks in Pigden. You remember this, little boy, she said. Little boy, it sounded friendly, not contemptuous. They never tell you any more truth than they have to. But any kid with brains knows that there have been some changes in science since the days of old Mazarakam and the victorious fleet. Obviously, we can now control gravity, turn it on and off, change the direction, maybe reflect it. I've thought of lots of neat things you could do with gravity weapons and gravity drives on starships. But how starships could move near planets? Maybe tear big chunks out of them by reflecting the planet's own gravity back on itself, only from another direction and focused on a smaller point. But they say nothing. Ender understood more than she did. Manipulation of gravity was one thing, deception by the officers was another. But the most important message was this: the adults are the enemy, not the other armies. They do not tell us the truth. Come, little boy, she said. The battle room is ready. Petra's hands were steady. The enemy is deadly? Oh, she's saying that. Man, every time she talks, I fuck up. Come, little boy, she said. The battle room is ready. Petra's hands are steady. The enemy, deadly, she giggled. Petra the poet, they call me. They also say you're crazy as a loon. Better believe it. She had 10 target balls in one bag. Ender held onto her suit with one hand and the wall with the other to steady her as she threw them hard in several directions. In null gravity, yeah, I've been working pretty hard to be able to do this well. It takes a good author though. I'm gonna tell you that to get the ball rolling with me. There's just there's authors that write well and there's authors that write incredible things, and sometimes they're both. But yeah, I like this is what I can provide. Like, okay, so the reason why I was just like laughing so hard, right, is they're like, once again, I'm hung up with the 70s in this book. Like a lot of like sci-fi, like 70s, like especially 2001 A Space Odyssey, they have that station and it has that turning segment in it in the space station, and that creates gravity in space, basically. Or it basically tricks your mind into thinking there's gravity because you're constantly falling outward. And one day we'll talk about satellites. Those are cool, the way satellites work, because they're not like actually up there. They're just constantly falling sideways. But that's basically what it is. And so the station they're on does that, okay? And they're trying to explain it. And if in a book you're ever like, okay, I don't know what exactly they're talking about, it's okay. You don't have to actually have the whole layout of the station, like you don't have to paint that picture because it's arbitrary. All right, the station could be a triangle or something. It doesn't matter. All right, what matters is what happens. So As long as you're on top of what's happening, or at least like as it's developing, then that's really the big takeaway here. The small minutia and the small details. The reason why I don't really the Game of Thrones guy, I love Game of Thrones, and I have hope because I heard House of the Dragon isn't awful, which is insane. I can't believe that. But the thing about George R. R. Martin is he will spend a half a page describing like a dagger hilt. And it's like, brother, just tell me what's happening. Like, and let's see. And I'll tell you what's happening. Oh yeah, but basic, yeah. Up to this point, Ender made a friend named Petra, and I think that like we left the exposition in the last read along, and now we're actually getting into the story. And there's a segment in here that's just going to seem kind of weird. And if there's a game he plays which is like an LSD trip, and it's strange. And I talk about a lot of when it happens. So when it happens, there'll be context after, but not during, because I actually think it heightens the experience, not knowing what's going on. Ender did not do his schoolwork, however. Okay. So now they're going to the war room. Okay. She had 10 target balls in a bag. Ender held onto her suit with one hand and the wall with the other to steady her as she threw them hard in different directions. And the null gravity, they bounced every which way. "Let go of me," she said. She shoved off, spinning deliberately. With a few deft hand moves, she steadied herself and began aiming carefully at ball after ball. When she shot one, its glow changed from white to red. Ender knew the color change lasted less than 2 seconds. Only one ball had changed back to white when she got the last one. Okay, so she set up a bunch of target balls and shot them. That was an arduous paragraph, man. Okay. She rebounded accurately from a wall and came at high speed back to Ender. He caught her and held her against her own rebound. One of the first techniques they had taught him as a launchie. "You're good," he said. "None better. And you're going to learn how to do it." Petra taught him how to hold his arm straight, to aim with the whole arm. Something most soldiers don't realize is that the farther away your target is, the longer you have to hold the beam within about a 2-centimeter circle. It's the difference between a tenth of a second and a half of a second. But in battle, that's a long time. A lot of soldiers think they missed when they were right on target, but they moved away too fast. So you can't use your gun like a sword. Swish, slice. You got to aim. She used the ball collar to bring the targets back, then launched them slowly, one by one. Ender fired at them. He missed every one. "Good," she said. "You don't have any bad habits." "I don't have any good ones either," he pointed out. "I'll give you those." They didn't accomplish much that first morning. Mostly talk. How to think while you are aiming? You've got to hold your own motion and your enemy's motion in your mind at the same time. You got to hold your arm straight out and aim with your body. So in case your arm is frozen, you can still shoot. Learn where your trigger actually fires and ride the edge. So you don't have to pull so far off each time you fire. Relax your body. Don't tense up. It makes you tremble. It was the only practice Ender got that day. During the army's drills in the afternoon, Ender was ordered to bring his desk and his schoolwork, Sitting in a corner of the room, Bonzo had to bring all his soldiers to the battle room, but he didn't have to use them. Ender did not do his schoolwork, however. He couldn't drill as a soldier, but he could study Bonzo as a tactician. Salamander Army was divided into the standard 4 toons of 10 soldiers each. Some commanders set up their toons so that A toon consisted of the best soldiers, and D toon had the worst, but Bonzo had mixed them so that each consisted of good soldiers and weaker ones. Except that B toon only had 9 boys. Ender wondered who had been transferred to make room for him. It soon became plain that the leader of the B toon was new. No matter, Bonzo was so disgusted. He had lost the toon leader to get Ender. And Bonzo was right about another thing. Ender was not ready. All the practice time was spent working on maneuvers. Toons that couldn't see each other practiced performing precision operations together with exact timing. Toons practiced using each other to make sudden changes of direction without losing formation. All these soldiers took for granted skills that Ender didn't have. The ability to make a soft landing and absorb most of the shock. Accurate flight, course the judgment, using the frozen soldiers floating randomly through the room. Rolls, spins, dodges, sliding along the walls. A very difficult maneuver, and yet one of the most valuable, since the enemy couldn't get behind you. Even as Ender learned how much he did not know, he also saw many things that he could improve on. The well-rehearsed formations were a mistake. It allowed the soldiers to obey orders shouted instantly, but it also meant they were predictable. Also, the individual soldiers were given little initiative. Once a pattern was set, they were to follow it through. There was no room for adjustment to what the enemy did against the formation. Ender studied Bonzo's formations like an enemy commander would, noting ways to disrupt the formation. During free play that night, Ender asked Petra to practice with him. No, she said. I want to be a commander someday, so I've got to play at the game room. It was a common belief that the teachers monitored the games and spotted potential commanders there. Ender doubted it, though. Toon leaders had a better chance to show what they might do as a commander than any video game. But he didn't argue with Petra. The after-breakfast practice was generous enough. Still, he had to practice, and he couldn't practice alone, except a few basic skills. Most of the hard things required patterns or teams. If only he still had a lie or shin to practice with. Well, why shouldn't he practice with them? He never heard of a soldier practicing with launchies, but there was no rule against it. It just wasn't done. Launchies were held in so much contempt. Well, Ender was being treated like a launchie anyways. He needed someone to practice with, and in return, he could help them learn some of the things he saw the older boys doing. Hey, the great soldier returns, said Bernard. Ender stood in the doorway. He'd only been away for a day, but already it seemed like an alien place, and the others of his launch group were strangers. Almost, he turned around and left, but there was a lie, who had made his friendship sacred. A lie was no stranger. Ender made no effort to conceal how he was treated in the Salamander Army. And they're right. I'm about as useful as a sneeze in a spacesuit. A lie laughed, and another launchie started to gather around. Oh my gosh, I'm slurring. Slur factor 6. Slur factor 6. Rarely read nonfiction? You read nonfiction for fun? Or I rarely I rarely read nonfiction. Okay. I got it switched around. I was gonna say you read. Oh yeah. You read nonfiction. There's some fun nonfiction. There's history's fun nonfiction, I think, because it's always a story about who screwed up, and I guess when I'm learning about who screwed up, I'm not worried about what my current screw ups are. My old boss, she had said like that somebody on the internet told her that once you're done reading a book, you should just get rid of it. But I think that the first read through is actually like a practice run, and it's the second read through that really just like makes everything come together. Because the first time around, you're kind of just trying to figure out what's going on. And the second time around, you're like, okay, all right, now it makes sense because you get the gist of it, the gist. Yeah, the gist. It's important to have the if you don't have the gist of it, you're not going to get any of it. Yeah, the pot. Oh, so yeah, okay. Okay, I thought that I was right. Yeah, okay. So like my thing is the main reason I read fiction is there's like an entire line of books that I know they're not written by the same person, but they have such like an intense quality control aspect that basically there's no contradiction. So I know that I'm getting like a really nice consistent product. That's the thing, is the consistency. And I guess the cool thing about nonfiction is that you will also have that same degree of consistency. It's believable, it works, it doesn't contradict with a bunch of other stuff that is also true. This book kind of, I dare say, draws a huge parallel between fiction and nonfiction, because my own like experiences going to basic training, it there's things that happen in this book that I remembered when I was in basic training, and I was like, what that's so weird. This book feels this book and Full Metal Jacket, I think, are like the quintessential like quintessential metaphors for what it's really like to be there. And it's also so much more. It's also so much more. It's perseverance and it's self-discovery. But at the end of the day, that's what makes this book more than just a children's book, is that factor there of really I guess when I was in basic training, the one thing I wanted the most in the world was a nap after lunch. Oh, no naps. And so but when you're not allowed to have naps and those little things, you start really honing in on what you are and who you are. And there were people there that just didn't really get it. They asked me, they used my last name, and they're like, why, if you're marching, why would you want to be spread out? Why would you want people spread out instead of not together? And I answer that question, it's because like in the event of an ambush, you don't want everyone to get mowed down in one. But I could tell from the slack jawed looks on the like no one really got it. And yeah, no, I'm smart. No, she said, I want to be a commander someday. Okay, here we go. Ender made no effort to conceal how he was treated in the Salamander army. And they're right. I'm about as useful as a sneeze in a spacesuit. They would learn things from the armies, from the battles Ender could see. He would get the practice he needed in developing soldier skills. We'll get ready together. A lot of boys wanted to come too. Sure, Ender said. If you're coming to work. If you're just farting around, you're out. We don't have any time to waste. They didn't waste any time. Ender was clumsy, trying to describe what he had seen, working out ways to do it. But by the first time free play ended, they had learned some of those things. They were tired, but they were getting the knack of a few techniques. Where were you? Asked Bonzo. Ender stood stiffly by the commander's bunk, practicing in a battle room. I heard that some of your old launchy group was with you. I couldn't practice alone. I won't have any soldiers in Salamander Army hanging around with launchies. You're a soldier now. Ender regarded him in silence. Do you hear me, Wiggin? Yes, sir. No more practicing with those little farts. May I speak to you privately? Asked Ender. It was a request that commanders were required to allow. Bonzo's face went angry, and when he led Ender out into the corridor, listen, Wiggin, I don't want you. I'm trying to get rid of you. But don't give me any problems, or I'll paste you into a wall. A good commander, thought Ender. Doesn't have to take stupid threats. Bonzo grew annoyed at Ender's silence. Look, you asked me to come out here. Now talk. Sir, you were correct not to place me in a tune. I don't know how to do anything. I don't need you to tell me when I'm correct, but I'm going to become a good soldier. I won't screw up your regular drill, but I'm going to practice. And I'm going to practice with the only people who will practice with me, and that's my launchies. You will do what I tell you, you little bastard. That's right, sir. I follow the orders that you're authorized to give. But free play is free. No assignments can be given. None. By anyone. He could see Bonzo's anger growing hot. Hot anger was bad. Ender's anger was cold. But he could use it. Bonzo's was hot, and so it used him. Sir, I've got my own career to think of. I won't interfere in your training and your battles. But I've got to learn something. I didn't ask to be put in your army. You're trying to trade me as soon as you can. But nobody will take me if I don't know anything, will they? Let me learn something. And then you can get rid of me all the soonest. And I get to be and you get a soldier to. Okay. I'm gonna crack out a couple of these. Where's the dialogue? I had the dialogue. Sir, I've got my own career to think of. Nobody will take me if I don't know anything, will they? Let me learn something. And then you can get rid of me all the sooner and get a soldier you can really use. Bonzo was not such a fool that anger kept him from recognizing good sense when he heard it. Still, he couldn't let go of his anger immediately. While you're in Salamander Army, you'll obey me. If you try to control my free play, I can get you iced. It probably wasn't true, but it was possible. Certainly, if Ender made a fuss about it, interfering with free play could conceivably get Bonzo removed from command. Also, there was the fact that the officers obviously saw something in Ender, because they had promoted him. Maybe Ender did have influence enough with the teachers to ice somebody. Bastard, said Bonzo. It isn't my fault. It isn't my fault you gave me that order in front of everybody, Ender said. But if you want, I'll pretend you won this argument. Then tomorrow, you can tell me you changed your mind. I don't need you to tell me what to do. I don't want the other boys to think you backed down. You wouldn't be able to command as well. Bonzo hated him for it, the kindness. Ender tried to understand why. Maybe it seemed to Bonzo as if Ender was granting his command a favor. Golly, and yet he had no choice. No choice about anything. Well, it was Bonzo's own fault for giving Ender an unreasonable order. Still, he would only know that Ender had beaten him, and then rubbed his nose into being magnanimous. I'll have your ass someday, Bonzo said. Probably, said Ender. The lights out buzzer sounded. Ender walked to the back room, looking dejected, beaten, angry. The other boys drew the obvious conclusion. And in the morning, as Ender was leaving for breakfast, Bonzo stopped him and spoke loudly. I changed my mind, pinprick. Maybe by practicing with your launches, you'll learn something, and I can trade you easier. Anything to get rid of you faster. Thank you, sir, Ender said. Anything, whispered Bonzo. I hope you're iced. Ender smiled gratefully and left the room. After breakfast, he practiced again with Petra. All afternoon, he watched Bonzo drill and figured out ways to destroy his army. During free play, he and Ali and the others worked themselves into exhaustion. I can do this, thought Ender, as he lay on his bed, his muscles throbbing, unknotting themselves. I can handle it. Salamander Army had a battle 4 days later. Ender followed behind the real soldiers as they jogged along the corridors of the battle room. There were 2 ribbons along the walls, the green-brown of the salamander and the black of condor. When they came to the place where the battle room had always been, the corridor split instead, with green-brown leading to the left and black to the right. Around another turn to the right, and the army stopped in front of a blank wall. The tunes formed up in silence. Ender stayed behind them all. Bonzo was giving his instructions. A, take the handles, go up. B, left. C, right. D, down. He saw that the tunes were oriented to follow the instructions and added, and you, pinprick, wait 4 minutes, then come just inside the door. Don't even take your gun out of your suit. Ender nodded. Suddenly, the wall behind Bonzo became transparent. Not a wall at all, then, but a force field. The battle room was different, too. Huge brown boxes were suspended in midair, partially obstructing the view. So these were the obstacles the soldiers called stars. They were distributed seemingly at random. Bonzo seemed not to care where they were. Apparently, the soldiers already knew how to handle the stars. But it soon became clear to Ender, as he sat and watched the battle room from the corridor, that they did not know how to handle the stars. They did not know how to soft land on one and use it for cover, the tactics of assaulting the enemy's position on a star. They showed no sense at all of which stars mattered. They persisted in assaulting stars that could have been bypassed by wall shielding to a more advanced position. The other commander was taking advantage of Bonzo's neglect of strategy. Condor Army faced the salamanders into costly assaults. Fewer and fewer of the salamanders were frozen for the attack on the next star. It was clear after only 4 minutes that Salamander Army could not defeat the enemy by attacking. Ender stepped through the gate. He drifted slightly downward. The battle rooms he had practiced in always had their doors at floor level. For real battles, however, the door was set in the middle of the wall, as far from the floor and as far from the ceiling. Abruptly, he turned himself to reorient, as he had in the shuttle. What had been down was now up and sideways. In Null O, there was no reason to stay oriented the way he had been in the corridor. It was impossible to tell, looking at the perfectly square doors, which had been way up, and it didn't matter. For few, Ender had found the orientation that made sense. The enemy's gate was down. The objective of the game was to fall towards the enemy's home. Ender made the motions that oriented himself in his new direction. Instead of being spread out, his whole body presented to the enemy. Now Ender's legs pointed towards them. He was now a much smaller target. So instead of like standing like this, and like the bad guys are over here, he's going like this, like, but I don't think he's like floating. But I wouldn't have thought of that because I would probably want to like stand. You know, it feels more manly to stand there and shoot him with my space gun than to float like a coffin towards him. Someone saw him. He was, after all, drifting aimlessly in the open. Instinctively, he pulled his legs up underneath him. At that moment, he was flashed, and the legs of his suit froze in position. His arms remained unfrozen, for without a direct body hit, only the limbs that were shot froze up. It occurred to Ender that if he had not been presenting his legs to the enemy, it would have been his body they hit. Then he would have been immobilized. Since Bonzo ordered him to draw his weapon, Ender continued to drift, not moving his head or arms, as if they had been frozen too. The enemy ignored him and concentrated their fire on the soldiers who were firing at them. It was a bitter battle. Outnumbered now, Salamander army gave ground stubbornly. Soberously. Damn it. It's okay. Salamander armor gave ground stubbornly. The battle disintegrated into a dozen individual shootouts. Bonzo's discipline paid off now. For each salamander, they took at least one enemy with them. No one ran or panicked. Everyone remained calm and aimed carefully. Petra was especially deadly. Condor Army noticed it and took great effort to freeze her. They froze her shooting arm first. Then her stream of curses was only interrupted when they froze her completely and the helmet clamped down on her jaw. In a few moments, it was over. Salamander Armory offered no more resistance. Ender noted with pleasure that Condor could only muster the minimal 5 soldiers necessary to open the gate to victory. 4 of them touched their helmets to the lighted spots on the corners of the Salamander's door, while the 5th passed through the force field. That ended the game. The lights came back on in their full brightness, and Anderson came out of the teacher door. I could have drawn my gun, thought Ender as the enemy approached the door. I could have drawn my gun and shot just one of them, and they would have been too few. The game would have been a draw. Without 4 men to touch the 4 corners and a 5th man to pass through the gate, Condor would have had no victory. Bonzo, you ass. I could have saved you from defeat. Maybe even turned it to victory, since they were sitting there, easy targets, and they wouldn't have known at first where the shots were coming from. But I'm a good shot for that. But orders were orders, and Ender promised to obey. He did get some satisfaction out of the fact that on the official tally, Salamander Army recorded not the expected 41 disabled or eliminated, or rather 40 eliminated and 1 damaged. Bonzo couldn't understand it until he had consulted Anderson's book and realized who it was. I was only damaged, Bonzo, thought Ender. I still could shoot. He expected Bonzo to come with him and say, next time, when it's like that, you can shoot. But Bonzo didn't say anything at him until the next morning after breakfast. Of course, Bonzo ate in the commander's mess, but Ender was pretty sure the odd score would cause as much stir there as it did in the soldiers' dining hall. In every other game that wasn't a draw, every member of the losing team was either eliminated, totally frozen, or disabled, which meant they had some body parts still unfrozen, but were unable to shoot or inflict damage on the enemy. Salamander was the only losing army with 1 man in the damaged but active category. Ender volunteered no explanation. The other members of Salamander Army let it be known why it had happened. And when other boys asked him why he hadn't disobeyed orders and fired, he calmly answered, I obey orders. After breakfast, Bonzo looked for him. The order stands, he said, and don't you forget it. It will cost you, you fool. I may not be a good soldier, but I can still help, and there's no reason you shouldn't let me. Ender said nothing. An interesting side effect of the battle was that Ender emerged at the top of the soldiers' efficiency list. Since he hadn't fired a shot, he had he had a perfect record on shooting, no misses at all. And since he had never been eliminated or disabled, his percentage was excellent. No one else came close. It made a lot of boys laugh, though. The others were angry. But on the prized efficiency list, Ender was now the leader. He kept sitting out the army practice sessions and kept working hard on his own, with Petra in the mornings and his friends at the night. More launchies were joining them now, not on a lark, but because they could see results. They were getting better and better. Ender and Ally stayed ahead of them, though. In part, it was because Ally kept trying new things, which forced Ender to think of new tactics to cope with them. In part, it was because they kept making stupid mistakes, which suggested things to do that no self-respecting, well-trained officer would ever have tried. Many of the things they attempted turned out to be useless, but it was always fun, always exciting, and enough things worked that they knew it was helping them. Evening was the best time of day. The next two battles were easy salamander victories. Ender came in after 4 minutes, remained untouched by the defeated enemy. Ender began to realize that Condor Army, which had been beaten, was unusually good. Salamander, weak as Bonzo's grasp of strategy might be, was one of the better teams, climbing steadily in the ratings, clawing for 4th place with Rat Army. Ender turned 7. They weren't much for dates and calendars at the battle school, but Ender found out how to bring up the date on his desk, and he noticed his birthday. The school noticed it too. They took his measurements and measured him a new salamander uniform and a new flash for the battle room. He went back to the barracks with the clothing on. It felt strange and loose, like his skin no longer fit properly. He wanted to stop at Petra's bunk and tell her all about home, about what his birthdays were usually like. Just tell her it was his birthday so she'd say something about it being a happy one. But nobody told birthdays. It was childish. It was what landsiders did. Cakes and silly customs. Valentine baked him a cake for his 6th birthday. It fell and was terrible. Nobody knew how to cook anymore. It was the kind of crazy thing Valentine would do. Everyone teased Valentine about it, but Ender saved a little bit in his cupboard. Then they took out his monitor, and he left, and for all he knew, it was still there, a little piece of greasy yellow dust. Nobody talked about home, not among the soldiers. There had been no life before battle school. Nobody got letters, and nobody wrote any. Everybody pretended they didn't care. But I do care, thought Ender. The only reason I'm here is so that a bugger won't shoot out Valentine's eye, won't blast her head open like the soldiers in the videos of the first battles with the buggers, won't split her head with a beam so hot her brains burst out the back of her skull and spill out like rising bread, the way it happens in my worst nightmares and my worst nights when I wake up trembling but silent, but must keep silent or they'll hear that I miss my family. I want to go home. It was better in the morning. Home was merely a dull ache in the back of his memory, a tiredness in his eyes. That morning, Bonzo came in, as if they were dressing. Flash suits, he called. It was a battle. Ender's 4th battle. The enemy was Leopard Army. It would be easy. Leopard was new, and was always in the bottom quarter of the standings. It had been organized only 6 months ago, with Paul Slattery as its commander. Ender put on his new battle suit and got into line. Bonzo pulled him roughly out of line and made him march to the end. You didn't need to do that, thought Ender. You could have just let me stay in line. Ender watched from the corridor. Paul Slattery was young, but he was sharp, and he had some new ideas. He kept his soldiers moving, darting from star to star, while sliding to get behind and move around the salamanders. Ender smiled. Bonzo was hopelessly confused, and so were his men. Leopard seemed to have men in every direction. However, the battle was not as lopsided as it seemed. Ender noticed that Leopard was losing a lot of men too, their reckless tactics exposing them too much. What mattered, however, was that Salamander felt defeated, that they surrendered the initiative completely. Though they were still fairly evenly matched with the enemy, they huddled together like the last survivors of a massacre, as if they hoped the enemy would overlook them in the carnage. Ender slipped slowly through the gate, oriented himself so that the enemy's gate was down, and drifted slowly eastward to a corner where he wouldn't be noticed. He even fired at his own legs to hold them in the kneeling position that offered the best protection. He looked to any casual glance, like another frozen soldier who had drifted helplessly out of battle. With Salamander army waiting abjectly for destruction, Leopard obligingly destroyed them. When Salamander finally stopped firing, Leopard had 9 boys left. They formed up and started to open the Salamander gate. Ender aimed carefully with a straight arm, as Petra had taught him. Before anyone knew what was happening, he froze 3 of the soldiers who were about to press their helmets against the lighted corners of the door. Then some of the others spotted him and fired. But at first, they only hit his already frozen legs. It gave him time to get the last 2 men at the gate. Leopard only had 4 men left unfrozen when Ender was finally hit in the arm and disabled. The game was a draw, and they had never hit him in the body. Paul Slattery was furious, but there had been nothing unfair about it. Everyone in Leopard Army assumed that it had been a strategy of Bonzo's to leave a man until the last minute. It didn't occur to them that little Ender had fired against the others. But Salamander knew. Bonzo knew, and Ender could see from the way his commander looked at him that Bonzo hated him for rescuing him from total defeat. I don't care, Ender told himself. It will make me just easier to trade away. And if in the meantime I don't drop so far in the standings, just trade me. I've learned all I'm ever going to learn from you. How to fail with style. That's all you know, Bonzo. But what have I learned so far? Ender listened to things in his mind as he undressed by his bunk. The enemy's gate is down. Use my legs as a shield in battle. A small reserve held back until the end of the game can be decisive, and soldiers can sometimes make decisions that are smarter than orders that they've been given. Wigan, I finally traded you. I was able to persuade Rat Army that your incredible place in the efficiency list is more than an accident. You go there tomorrow. Thank you, sir, Ender said. Perhaps he sounded too grateful. Suddenly, Bonzo swung at him, caught his jaw with a vicious open-handed slap. It knocked Ender sideways into his bunk, and he almost fell. Then Bonzo slugged him, hard in the stomach. Ender dropped to his knees. You disobeyed me, Bonzo said loudly for all to hear. No good soldier ever disobeys. Even as he cried from the pain, Ender could not help but take vengeful pleasure in the murmurs he heard rising through the barracks. You fool, Bonzo. You aren't enforcing discipline, you're destroying it. They know how I turned defeat into a draw. And now they see how you repay me. You made yourself look stupid in front of everyone. What is your discipline even worth now? The next day, Ender told Petra that for her sake, the shooting practice in the morning would have to end. Bonzo didn't need anything that looked like a challenge now, and so she'd better stay clear of Ender for a while. She understood perfectly. Besides, she said, you're as close to being a good shot as you'll ever be. He left his desk and flash suit in the locker. He would wear his salamander uniform until he could get to the commissary and change it for the brown and black of a rat. He had brought no possessions with him. There were none left to have. Everything of value was in the school computer or his own head and hands. He used one of the public desks in the game room to register for an Earth Gravity personal combat course during the hour immediately after breakfast. He didn't plan to get vengeance on Bonzo for hitting him, but he did intend that no one would ever be able to do that again. The one thing fiction can't really do too well, and like the reason I was laughing so much earlier, it's kind of like the Star Trek effect. We're basically like in the last act, the Deus, or I guess you just call it Deus Ex Machina, where this Deus Ex Machina just comes and saves the day, and it's cool and all, but it's saving a problem that also the writer also came up. So I mean, it's like a snake oil salesman, basically. Oh, you got this crazy, terrible sickness no one's ever heard of. Well, here's a crazy antidote no one's ever heard of. And so when Ender was asking about details about how gravity works, and Petra's like, just shut up, don't talk about it. It's basically Orson Scott Card being like, look, dude, I'm not an astrophysicist. I don't know how that works. There's some cool shit I threw in the book, so you could take it or leave it. And so I could see why fiction in some ways can be grading, because where nonfiction isn't, because there is a possible answer besides Deus Ex Machina. Henry. Rat. I'm noticing that if I get too high, I get too stupid to read the book. So it's a fine line. It's a fine line. It was about like a 5-minute window, so it's not that bad. I was initially. It's not that bad.